Hi, it's David at Mesh IT. Well, we've had just over a month now with the Surface Pro 8. We gave it a good review and we've had a lot of hands-on time with it and I've been incredibly impressed, much more than I was actually expecting. So the question I found myself asking is, how well does it stack up against the Apple Silicon M1 MacBook Pro 13? Now yes, the M1 MacBook Air or MacBook Pro has been out for just over a year now, but it was such a surprise hit with its incredible battery, the incredible performance of the Apple Silicon processor, the low heat and no noise, that it became an easy recommendation for people asking for an everyday multimedia machine. So tonight I've decided to compare the Apple Silicon MacBook Pro 13-inch against the Surface Pro 8, as both of these come in at just under £1,300 in the UK. So before we start the comparison, I just want to get the specs out of the way. The Apple Silicon M1 MacBook Pro, this comes in at £1,299 in the UK. It's a 13.3-inch laptop with an 8-core Apple Silicon CPU and an 8-core GPU. It has 8GB of unified memory, and it also has a 256GB NVMe fast SSD. Now the Surface Pro 8, this is a 2-in-1 13-inch Infinity display device. It comes with 8GB of DDR4 memory, 128GB of SSD, and an i5 processor with Iris graphics. Now the actual Surface itself is only £999, so obviously less than the MacBook Pro. But in order to get the full package, you're also going to need to buy the type cover, and you're probably going to want to have the pen as well, because this is a 2-in-1 device that you like to be drawing or taking notes on. And when you combine the entire package, you're looking at £1,290 in the UK. So these are very similar in price. So just to start off with weights, the Surface Pro 8, the tablet itself weighs 891 grams, but when you add in the actual keyboard and the actual pen, you're looking at 1.15 kilograms, whereas the MacBook Pro 13-inch comes in at just under 1.4 kilograms. So the Surface Pro 8 is the lighter device. And when we put them on top of each other to look at the size, now although these are both 13-inch laptops, the Apple is actually a 13.3-inch and the Surface is bang on 13 inches, but the Surface is a 3x2 display, which means you've got higher vertical space. So if we look at these devices, you'll see that the Surface Pro 8 is pretty much the same depth as the MacBook Pro 13, but there's quite a lot of extra space at the side because the MacBook Pro is a 16x10 display. And when we put them side by side, you can see that the MacBook Pro is ever so slightly thinner than the actual Surface Pro 8 with the type cover attached. And if you took the type cover off, the Surface Pro 8 would be slightly thinner than the MacBook Pro 13. So overall, these are two very portable and light devices. Now, if we look at the actual ports on these devices, we'll start with the MacBook Pro. This is very easy, you don't get many. And if we look to the top, you'll see that we have a headset jack on the right-hand side, and we have two USB 4/Thunderbolt ports on the left-hand side, and that is your lot. And if we look at the Surface Pro 8 left side, you'll see we have the headset jack, and we've actually got a volume rocker because this is also a tablet as well as a laptop. It's a 2-in-1 device. And if we switch it to the right side, we've got the power button, two Thunderbolt 4 ports, and a Surface Connect and stroke charger port. So the ports wise, we do have a slightly better selection with the actual Surface Pro 8. And just want to also mention, if I pull up the kickstand here, although the Surface Pro 8 only comes with 128GB of SSD on the base model, this little panel here pops off very easily with just a SIM card removal tool and gives you access to the 30mm M.2 SSD. And being able to upgrade the SSD yourself not only allows you to easily change it if your SSD ever fails, but you can upgrade this for a fraction of the cost that Microsoft or Apple charges if you configure a higher SSD in their devices. And just in case you're interested, we have actually upgraded an SSD on a Surface Pro 7 Plus, which is exactly the same layout as this. I will put a link down in the description if you want to see how easy it is to actually change that SSD. So upon opening the laptop, you're greeted to a one piece of aluminium that is actually milled to provide you with a very solid, sturdy machine with the MacBook Pro. The Macs have been doing this for years and they've really honed this process. This is a slim light laptop, but it is built like a tank and it feels great. Now the Surface Pro 8, the actual tablet itself has a sort of a magnesium build, which is again, it's a premium quality material and the build feels great. The Surface type cover has got this nice Alcantara on it. This does seem to wear well. Gary and I have been using our Surface Pros for years now, and I think Gary's still on his Surface Pro type cover from Surface Pro 4. So that shows you how well that they do hold up, but they can get a little bit mucky. So you do have to be careful if you've got your Cheeto fingers on top of your laptop. Looking at the touchpads, the MacBook Pro 13 has what I consider the industry standard, the best touchpad you can get on a laptop. This uses the Force Touch trackpad to give you haptic feedback instead of mechanical clicks when you're pressing on the actual touchpad. So you can click anywhere on the actual touchpad and it registers as a click. By contrast, the Surface Pro 8 uses a diving board mechanism for the actual trackpad, which is hinged along the top. So absolutely fine when you're clicking at the lower part of the touchpad, but if you're trying to click at the top, nothing's really going to be happening, whereas obviously as it's hinged here. But you can also tap to click as well if you prefer that. And also, do you want to just note the size of these two touchpads? The MacBook Pro 13 is approximately twice the size, twice the surface area of the Surface Pro 8 touchpad, which leads again to a much more comfortable experience moving around and using gestures on a touchpad. The Surface Pro 8 is still a good touchpad, gestures work well, but obviously you can see the limited space that you've got to work with on this machine. Now as we move up to the actual keyboard itself, both of these have fantastic keyboards. I would give the win slightly to the Surface Pro 8, and the Alcantara type cover does have a little bit of flex in it, and some people may not like that. But what I do love about it is, firstly, I like the incline that you get by having the Alcantara type cover at an angle here. It's incredibly comfortable when you're sort of resting your wrists on this material. And the keys themselves have got a firm and crisp actuation and a really good spacing, which means typing on this feels fantastic. Now, don't get me wrong, typing on the MacBook Pro is great, and it certainly is a lot better than the travesty that was the butterfly keyboard that was replaced a couple of years ago. But another point of note with the MacBook Pro is at the top of the screen, rather than function keys, you do have the touch bar. Now, this is something that I personally don't enjoy, and it's something they've done away with on the MacBook Pro 14 and 16 inches. And if you're like me and you really don't like the actual touch bar, you could just opt for the MacBook Air, which is a little bit cheaper than this, and that has function keys as well. Some people do like the OLED touch bar. You can customize it to have what you want on there and lay out the icons the way you wish. You can skip through like tracks of music or videos. So some of that I can see has its benefits. But the biggest problem for myself is there's no haptic feedback when you press it. And it's very easy to accidentally touch the actual touch bar and miss-hit something. And also, depending on the app, you'll have different functions displayed. So you can't like build up the muscle memory like you can do with your function keys. Now, either side of the speakers, you can see there's like a grill here, and I believe there are some upward firing speakers. It does have a few speakers in the MacBook Pro 13. The Surface Pro 8 has little cutouts either side of the screen here for forward-facing speakers. Both of the speakers are great, and they sound like this. Okay, speaker test of the Surface Pro 8 at 50% volume. MacBook. And 80%. %. Wow, I just never thought I'd see the day. The Surface Pro speakers are really good. I think the MacBook Pro has very slightly fuller sounding speakers than the Surface Pro 8, which is firing straight at you. But the Surface Pro 8 is a lot louder than the MacBook Pro. So out of my two, I think I prefer listening to music and podcasts on the Surface Pro 8. Now, as we move up to the screen, the MacBook Pro has a more traditional 16:10 500 nit P3 Retina display. It's a high DPI display. As I say, it's very bright at 500 nits and it's very color accurate. It's a great display. It also has True Tone, so it can adjust your colours to your office lighting, which can be quite handy, but it also can be a bit difficult if you do need to colour grade. And it does have an anti-glare coating on here, which works adequately. It's not as good as a matte display, but obviously this gives you the benefits of both worlds of having a glossy and a little bit of anti-glare built in. The Surface Pro 8, on the other hand, this is a 3x2 pixel sense display, so we've got slightly higher vertical resolution. This gives us a benefit in mostly work applications, so if you're coding, using a spreadsheet, or even web surfing, having that extra vertical real estate is really useful. Again, it's very bright at about 500 nits. It also has Microsoft's version of the True Tone where it can adapt the colour to your environment. Again, with both of these, this can be turned off if you don't like it. It's also a very colour accurate display, but the Surface Pro 8 is also 120 Hz. This is a first for the Surface Pro lines, and I have to be honest, this has been great. It feels so much more responsive than previous Surface Pro panels, and a lot more responsive than the 60 Hz MacBook Pro 13. Now, eventually it will be an auto refresh rate, so it will adjust depending on the application you're using, but that hasn't been implemented in Windows 11 yet, so at the moment you do need to switch it to either 120 or 60 manually. Now, as we move to the top of the screens, the MacBook Pro has a 720p webcam and the Surface Pro 8 has a 1080p webcam. They look and sound like this. And this is what the webcam and the microphones look and sound like on the Surface Pro 8. And this is how the webcam looks and sounds on the MacBook Pro 13. And also with the Surface Pro 8, we have the IR Windows Hello facial recognition. Now, this is by far my favourite way of logging into a Windows laptop. You pop down the type cover and it just logs you straight in. It's so seamless and incredibly quick. It's definitely, of the two of these laptops, my favourite way of logging in. The MacBook Pro 13, it does have Touch ID, so you can just press the button at the top, which is the power button, and that will log you in very fast. But it is an extra step having to put your finger up and actually touch the touchpad. So, although not as fast as the Windows Hello facial recognition, it's still quite a quick way to log into the actual Mac operating system. And also, again, just moving on from the webcams, on the Surface Pro 8, because it is a 2-in-1 device, at the rear of the Surface Pro 8, we also have a 10 megapixel camera. This can be very handy if you're using it as a tablet, you want to take some photos, and they look pretty good. Here are some example shots, just to show you what they do look like. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, this is a 2-in-1 device, so this can be a big positive for somebody that's looking for a laptop that can also be used for taking notes or drawing, so not just for the work and play of a normal laptop. Now, Apple are firmly against this 2-in-1 idea, so therefore, if you're buying a MacBook, you're buying it just to be used as a laptop, or if you're buying an iPad Pro, it is purely to be used as a tablet. It doesn't ever get that full desktop functionality. Instead, they want you to buy both devices. Now, this is a much more expensive way of obviously looking at things, but I happen to have a laptop and your iPad. But the iPad is a much better tablet experience than the Surface Pro 8. And the actual MacBook is a better laptop experience than the Surface Pro 8. And for anybody that's ever used a Surface Pro 8 on their lap, they're probably going to understand what I'm talking about. And also, the Apple ecosystem, although expensive, is better thought out. If you have got your iPad Pro and a MacBook, the iPad can be used as an extended screen. If you've got the Apple Watch, you can use that for unlocking your MacBook when you open the lid. The fact that you can actually copy and paste from one device to another, and that saved me a few times when I'm working on a laptop and I wanted to text some information to somebody with my phone. It all works really well, but in order to completely immerse yourself, you're going to need very deep pockets. The Surface, on the other hand, being a jack of all trades but the master of none, still has a lot going for it. The inking experience is absolutely fantastic on this 120Hz display. And also the new Microsoft Slim pen has haptic feedback, so when you are using the pen on the screen, it feels like you're like a pencil drawing on paper. It's a much better experience than previous Surfaces, and in my opinion, I prefer drawing on a Surface than I do on an iPad Pro. The Surface Pro's kickstand is absolutely awesome. It's something I think they should have added to an iPad years ago. Being able to change the incline for if you're drawing, or be able to just stand it up for when you're watching movies. Something's been amazing with this Surface range of devices. Ripping off the keyboard is incredibly easy and not only allows use as a tablet, but it also works well when docked to a screen, as you can sit the Surface directly under the display for some great dual screen functionality. So now let's take a quick look at performance. And if we're looking at the benchmarks, the MacBook Pro 13 shoots ahead of the Surface Pro 8 in single-core CPU, multi-core CPU, the SSD speeds, and the GPU benchmarks. But in all honesty, in day-to-day use with the apps that I'm using to test these devices, both these machines felt incredibly snappy and responsive. So benchmarks aside, these are both great to use. The only one area where the MacBook Pro really excels and leaves the Surface Pro in its dust is video editing. This is an area where the MacBook Pro excels due to the Apple Silicon's power and efficiency in multimedia related tasks. The Surface Pro with its Intel Iris graphics really lacks in this area. DaVinci Resolve is pretty much unusable with onboard graphics, and Adobe Premiere is only usable for light projects. So if you've got really undemanding video editing needs, you could just about get away with the Surface Pro 8, but it's not a comfortable experience. Now, neither of these devices are gaming powerhouses. The Apple Silicon MacBook Pro works well for the games that are available in macOS, but there are very few. A couple of popular titles like Dota, Fortnite, Warhammer or Shadow the Tomb Raider, they're playable on this machine, which is really impressive as most of these aren't even running native in Apple Silicon. And the Surface Pro 8 with its Iris graphics is great for light gaming, and Windows has a vast library of indie and light titles that are playable on this device. And if gaming is something that you really want to do and you don't want to buy a gaming laptop, you could also buy an eGPU and use the Thunderbolt port to then play some AAA titles with a machine like this. Heat and noise is a non-issue with both of these devices. The MacBook Pro is absolutely incredible. It never heats up, and the fan noise, I think I've only had it once or twice in the entire time that I've used this Mac, and that is really heavily pushing it, like something like Cinebench R23, to get the heat up enough to spin the fans up. That's really quite impressive. Now the Surface Pro 8, heat isn't an issue again, because any heat that's generated is in the tablet portion. Now when you're using this, and you're probably doing demanding tasks, you're more likely going to have it in a laptop mode when your hand's on this type cover, so there'll be no heat generated. It's very unlikely that you're going to be using it in heavy load in tablet mode, so that's probably never going to be an issue. And with the Surface Pro 8, when you heavily push the machines, you will hear the fan spin up, and although they are audible, they've been massively improved this year over previous Surfaces, and are now a gentle whoosh rather than the annoying whine that we had previously. Now with regards to battery life, this section isn't even a contest. The battery life on the Apple Silicon MacBook Pro is absolutely incredible due to the Apple Silicon's efficiency. I'll easily get 15 plus hours movie watching at 50% brightness on this MacBook Pro 13. And it's totally changed the way that I actually use the device. Whereas before on a Windows machine, I'm very often always plugged in. With the MacBook Pro, I very often go 2 or 3 days without charging. This device can even be heavily utilized for video editing or programming or something that's going to really tax the system for a good 7 or so hours on battery. And even now, I'll edit the odd video on this MacBook Pro on battery, and this is something I've never considered on any Intel or Windows laptop. The Surface Pro 7, on the other hand, is much worse. Even if I tweak the system for best battery, change the refresh rate down to 60 Hz, I can just about eke out 7 hours of battery life watching videos at 50% brightness like I do on the MacBook Pro. And if I'm heavily utilising this device, I'm lucky to get 3 or 4 hours out of it. But fortunately, both of these devices are incredibly responsive on battery power, so that's something that you're not going to have to worry about. The performance on battery is almost as good as when you are plugged in. So unlike certain gaming laptops when you unplug and they literally throttle the power right down, you don't get that with these devices. So when you are using battery, it still feels snappy and responsive. Now with regards to the power adapters, this is an area where the Surface Pro 8 takes the lead. The Surface Pro 8 power adapter uses a magnetic tip that plugs straight into the laptop to prevent accidental pulls off of your desk, and also has an indicator light to show that it's plugged into your laptop and charging. The adapter itself is nice and slim and compact, and it also contains a USB port so that you may charge your phone or iPad or any other device via the little USB cable. And not only that, because we've got Thunderbolt 4 on this actual Surface Pro 8, you can also charge via just a standard USB-C adapter or a dock, power bank, or even a monitor. The MacBook Pro 13, on the other hand, this only has your standard USB-C or Thunderbolt ports, so it comes with a USB-C adapter. It's much more bulky than the Surface Pro, but the one good thing about this adapter is you can actually take the USB-C lead off and replace it rather than replacing the whole power adapter if that lead breaks. Also again, because we're using that USB-C standard, power banks, docks and monitors with hubs also work well with this device. So after looking at both of these devices, which one would you choose? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, in my opinion, this is going to be a really hard choice. Now, when this Apple Silicon MacBook Pro was first released, it was up against the Surface Pro 7. Unless you really needed a Windows device or you really wanted that 2-in-1 tablet, it was very hard to choose the Surface Pro 7 over this amazing Apple Silicon MacBook Pro 13. But now that we have the Surface Pro 8 with much improved performance, a lovely 13-inch 120Hz screen, Thunderbolt ports, better speakers and a much improved inking experience, this is a much harder choice. From my testing, I would say the MacBook Pro 13 is the better laptop experience. With its incredible battery life, incredible performance providing your software is available in macOS, lack of fan and heat, and better lappability, this is a great machine to choose. But if you're looking for a device that can fit many roles, the Surface Pro 8 has been an absolute joy to use. And now that they've finally included Thunderbolt ports on these devices, we can also take advantage of those ports to provide extra GPU performance via an eGPU if you want to use this laptop for 3D work or video editing or even a bit of gaming. So on the basis of all that, in this video, for me personally, I think I'm going to have to choose the MacBook Pro. Just for me, with the battery life, the lack of fan noise, and the apps that I'm using, this has been an incredible device for the last year. But I don't do a lot of drawing on the device, so I don't really make use of it as a tablet or an art device. I know Gary, who is a much bigger Surface Pro user than I am, he would always pick the Surface Pro over an actual Mac. But for today, MacBook Pro for the win.